chosen my palette of colours, French ultramarine and Quin sienna. You could use a burnt sienna, which will mix to a great dark. I've got some Pyrrole orange, which is a lovely pinky orange, and then a Potter's blue and a cerulean blue. And because I'm doing the watercolour first, I'm not worrying about whether they're opaque or semi-opaque, because I'm going to do the pen on top, so they won't mask any of my pen work. I've sketched out my lovely dog onto a half sheet of watercolour paper. It's Bockingford, £140, and it's half an imperial sheet. So I've sketched out my dog in just an HB pencil, and I'm going to wet the paper around the dog, because I can see from my reference that that light hitting there is really important. So I want to capture some of that light, and I'm going to be super brave and just go for it so that I get some really nice effects, I'm hoping. And I'm going to put my washes on as loose and splishy sploshy as I can, so that I get some really exciting effects. Then leave it to dry and come back with the pen. And I'd love to be able to say there's rhyme or reason to what I'm choosing, but I'm just going to have a play. I'm going carefully here. Even I did say, oh yeah, I'm going to go splishy sploshy, but I do need to make sure that that light is captured, because that is why I liked the painting in the first place. Oh, I'm getting some nice feathery marks into the wet paint, and we'll just see what it does. And of course, this isn't the last time I put paint on. I can always, once I've finished my ink work, I can touch things up, and I will, particularly around the eye, because the eye needs to be the real focus of this portrait. If I want, I've got a little spray bottle. Get real movement, get some interesting marks. Don't know whether I like that one or not up there, to be honest. Don't think I do. So it's going. Wetting the paper first gives me more working time, which is nice. And I like these two oranges together. So if you've got quite staining colours, it's again just stops them sinking into the paper before they've got time to move. And then I'm going to come in, bring some orange into the dog. Potter's blue is the weirdest colour. I don't know why I've even got it in my palette, and the reason I wanted to use it today was because I never use it and I want to use it up. It's really opaque and it sort of separates out in your palette. It's odd. So it's all going to look a bit wild and weird at the moment, but we don't mind wild and weird, do we? She says. Everything's dried overnight, so now I can start with the pen work. And I have a huge collection of pens. You don't need this many. But these are waterproof, which doesn't matter on this occasion because, of course, we're working on top of the watercolour. They are lightfast and they come in all sorts of different sizes from, I think, even down to 0.05, which I don't tend to use. There's a 0.7 and they go up to 1. So let's grab out a few and not confuse myself. I'll grab a few extra just in case any of these are starting to run out. And I really want to start working on that eye. I don't want to just outline the paint marks. I want to really make the pen and the paint work together to add up to more than the sum of the parts. So I'm going to try and use a nice sort of flowing movement, but also constantly ask myself whether the lines are actually necessary, because you don't actually possibly need too much. We might not. Life will be a lot better once I get a bit of a pupil going in here. I'm looking and there isn't a dark line along the bottom of the eye. See, isn't that better already? And though I am scribbling, this isn't like a scribble drawing where you're building up tone with your scribble. The watercolour has already done an awful lot of that tone work for me. You may find that the paint, especially if you're working over fairly chalky or opaque paint, you may find that it slightly clogs up your nib. Don't worry about that. I mean, switch to another or just scribble on a piece of paper. What I would like to do is just get the eye in, because I think that will be quite transformational. It can dry and then we can work on top of it a bit more. So I've done a very bright orange, lovely little bit of orange there, and now I'm just coming in with a tiny touch of sienna to give it more shape and roundness. There is a highlight and there are very tiny little eyelashes, so it's just distinguishing what is highlight and what is eyelash. I'm going to leave that alone and let it dry. Just coming over to the nose, and the nose, the ink marks on the nose may be a little bit different to the ink marks elsewhere because the nose is a different texture. They're sort of circular, aren't they? So we could do a sort of more circular scribbly mark if we wanted to. And it's nice to mix up the marks between, you know, more linear scribble, more circular marks. And so forth. I've speeded up the recording to, I think it's about 8 times the speed I was actually doing. And you can see that I'm adding in both penwork and a little bit of extra watercolour in a few places where I felt the tone was necessary. So I'm building up tone and detail here. I'm just popping those whisker lines in, and I'm in places I will use the pen to deepen tone and add a little bit of definition, and in places I have added a little bit more watercolour if I felt that was a better option. I'm working all the way round the painting, not finishing off one area, because the danger of super completing one area is that actually if you build up all that detail there, you come to another area and think, oh, I've done too much. Now under the fold of the ear here, I'm using a lot of ink to get the sort of longer hairy marks of inside the ear and building up a bit more tone. In hindsight, I wish I'd added a little bit more watercolour in this area to deepen the tone first, but I didn't. So I'm varying the marks. So on the ear, some are quite linear, there's a sort of folded edge to the ear, some are quite long. I'm changing the widths of my pen to continue to add lots of interest, so that some marks are a little bit thicker, some are a little bit finer, and that's just sort of judgment. It's an extra layer of interest for the viewer. Probably won't realise, but I know, so that's important. And again, I'm just working my way all the way round the painting to get balance. Now I saw, bizarrely enough, a demonstration on a Great Dane by a very good artist called Dina Marshall. Totally different type of painting, but she did some of these sort of wilder swirls around. She said when she felt her lines were getting a bit tight, she sort of swirled out from the painting, and I thought, well, I'll give that a go. Wouldn't usually do that, but let's see. I'm not convinced, but hey, it's only a piece of paper, it's good to try. So I think I'm getting pretty close to where I want to go, just trying to keep detail on the eye. Now I'm taking out all the pencil lines that are showing, and that just cleans it up. It's quite amazing how removing a few pencil lines just makes everything look a little bit sharper and cleaner. So I'm doing that. Got to make sure your painting is totally dry and the ink's dry before you do that, because smudged ink is vile. Don't mind smudged watercolour. But these pens do dry very, very quickly, so that's perfect. I'm carrying on making these marks, working my way around the picture, just swapping over details, building up tone, but really trying not to go too far, because obviously you cannot remove ink once it's on the surface of the paper, so it's far better to build things up gradually. But as a process, this is very quick. I would say the inking side of things took about 45 minutes in total. I say before, the painting took, I don't know, 15 minutes, though it did have a very long drying time because I had gone a little over the top with the water. Adding just a tiny bit of tone here along those whisker lines, and just to sort of darken under the chin. If I need to add pen, I must make sure that that is dry before I add any more on top. But you can swap backwards and forwards as much as you like, as long as each layer is dry. So just darkening in a few places, and I really am pretty much finished on the black ink side of things. And then it suddenly occurred to me, well, I've used black ink, why don't I add in some white lines, just to add a few little highlights and a little bit of detail. And I could have done that with gouache and a rigger, or I could do that with a white pen and there are different sorts of white pens. You can get white jelly roll pens, you can get Posca markers, which are paint pens, and I decided to use Posca markers. I find they're just a little bit more opaque than the jelly roll pens, but they do have the danger of blobbing slightly, so need to be careful. You've got to be careful adding white because it definitely looks added on. It has a different quality to it than the rest of the painting, so need to be careful when I get to that point. Here you can see I was just adding a few more of those wild lines. I didn't want my dog to look shaggy because it's very short haired, so I'm not convinced about those loosening up lines, but I quite like the way the ink goes into the background and ties the background to the dog, so I might do a little bit more of that on occasions, but just go careful. Right, here comes the white. It's quite subtle, it's just in places, so I'm putting a little bit along the edge, a little bit along the little white eyelashes, highlights on the nose, highlights under the lips. The ink blobbed a little bit here, so I actually deliberately made it blobby in a few other places to balance up the marks so that it didn't look like I got a thick accidental mark in one place. And I quite like those just little bits of highlight to pull things forward. The paint pens are waterproof once they're dry, but you can adjust them a little. And then I'm going to shield the work and put on a few splats of gouache, and that just stops it going where I don't want it. Hope you enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe if you did.